I am Jamey Stegmaier, and I run a company called Stegmaier Games here in St. Louis. I designed a game called Scythe, which is going to be the focus of what I talk about today. It was very nice of James at Board Game Network to ask me to come on his channel and talk a little bit about my background and about the top 5 strategy tips for playing Scythe, kind of as on an advanced level. Maybe not your first game, but your second or third or 10th game. I'm going to start off by answering some questions that James asked me. I'm just going to answer them. I won't say the question, so it might seem kind of random, but these are just some quick hits of things that James asked me. My background in education is I grew up as a gamer. I played games. I designed games from a pretty young age, just as a hobby, and I studied nothing relating to games at all. I studied in college. I studied international business and Japanese. I studied here in St. Louis at Washington University in St. Louis, and I spent a year abroad in Kyoto my junior year. I had 2 jobs after college. I worked as a project manager at a book publishing company, and I worked also after that at Washington University doing as a director of operations, so managing a staff and running a facility, and I did some budgeting work and some marketing work. So a lot of different things from those jobs and some summer jobs like waiting tables that contributed to running a business, running Stegmaier Games today. The style of games I love to play these days are typically Euro games. I like problem solving. I like piecing together different elements, and I like engine building a lot, which is a huge part of a lot of Euro games. I like starting from very little and building up to a lot. I love that aspect in games, and so that's largely in a number of Euro games. But I also love kind of just random games and other genres. You can't see it. Well, I guess you can kind of see my game shelf back there. I love Telestrations, which is not really in that realm. I love Kemet, which is kind of a Euro, but it's definitely much more of a combat game. I love Blockus, which is just a pure abstract game. But most of the games on my shelf are Euro games. That's definitely my focus. Some games that are in the works for me right now. So I'm filming this in February of 2017, in case you're watching this in the future or the past, which would be impressive. Right now I'm working on a new expansion for Scythe. I'm wrapping up the tail end of the graphic design and final file prep of the Between Two Cities expansion. I am working on Charterstone. Right now I'm in wave 3 of blind playtesting of Charterstone, which is a village building legacy game. It'll be our big release in 2017. And I have about 6 games I'm kind of in the brainstorming stage on right now. I guess the only one that I'm really comfortable talking about at this point, because these games may not go anywhere, is a game that we have signed that was created by another designer that I am working to develop. So it's I'll release details about that game later. The overall theme is birds, but I'll talk about that in the future on my website stegmaiergames.com and on Facebook and places like that once the game evolves a bit more. I got into designing games kind of like I said from a pretty young age. It was just one of those things. I think we all have our creative pursuits and passions that we just stumble upon. They're the types of things that no one pushes us into, and that was the case with board game design. I found that just as much as I loved playing games, I loved designing them, and so I did that from a pretty young age. Although most of my games, as I look back from when I was 6, 7, all the way through my teenage years, most of the time I would play a game and then I would create my version of it with a different theme and different mechanisms, but looking back, it was pretty similar. So I have a game that was similar to Scotland Yard. I have a game that was similar to kind of like Monopoly, though I like to think that I took it slightly more advanced than what Monopoly was. I have a game. What else did I do? I'm blanking on most of them right now. A bunch of other random games following that trend of kind of learning from another game and copying it. James asked me about asymmetrical games and how I decide when a unique ability is too strong or weak. Asymmetry is especially when, so there's the type of asymmetry that you move into during a game. So like you start off on the same level as everybody else, and maybe the first thing you do in the game or something early on in the game is you take a card that determines your path. Or maybe it's a hidden objective card, or maybe it's the type of asymmetry like in Scythe, where it's a faction ability that is completely and distinctly unique from the other factions in the game. In Scythe, I for most of the early playtesting for Scythe, leading up to and through Wave 1 of blind playtesting, none of the factions had unique faction abilities. They had unique mech abilities, but not unique faction abilities. And that's because I wanted to get all the other elements of the game, get a really, really strong foundation for all those other elements and make sure they were fun before I added the additional element of the faction ability. So that's a key part of, I don't know if I would always do it that way, but that was really helpful because I just wanted to make sure the game worked before I started throwing in all these variable elements. Determining if it's too strong or too weak, I mean, it really comes from playtesting, and that was the case with Scythe. We just kind of beat it to submission through hundreds and hundreds of playtests to see if a certain ability was too strong or too weak. Usually, circumstantially, ability might end up being too strong or too weak, but we look for, across the board. Are there, by and large, is this ability about the same in power as the other abilities? And that's what we did through playtesting and Scythe and just gathering a ton of data to see if that was the case. Scythe went through a ton of development. I've talked about this on other podcasts. If you want to delve deep into this, look in the interview section or reviews and media section of our website under Scythe. Scythe was essentially my full-time job was designing Scythe for about a year. Early on, it was a lot of just brainstorming and figuring out how to design a game that fit into the world of Jakub Rozalski's art, because this was an art-first game and a world-first game that I applied a game to. And then it was just a lot of local playtesting with my co-founder Alan and local friends. I would playtest, I would take that feedback, I would iterate, and eventually we got to the point where it was fun and functional, and that's when I went to blind playtesting. Some of the key things that changed during that development process, the game completely changed. Originally it was a card-driven game where every character on the board had a unique ability and a unique personality and a story. I'm kind of what I said earlier. When I was young, I was influenced by other games, and when I'm old, I'm still doing that. At the time, I had played Dead of Winter, and I loved that there were all these different characters on the board with their own stories and abilities, and so I was taking that and putting it in a Euro game. But I moved away from that. It was just too much to keep track of all those different characters on the board. Another big thing that went through a ton of different iterations was combat. This was my first game designing combat, and it started with a bunch of dice, and then it moved to like a ton of dice manipulation, and then the more and more I played it, and the more and more I realized what the game was, which is at its heart an engine building game where players have a lot of control and a lot of agency over their decisions, the less I wanted dice in the combat. So like every version of combat had fewer and fewer dice until the point where I was like, no, we're not going to put dice in this game. That element was heavily influenced. The final version of combat was heavily influenced by Rex, the combat in Rex, where there are dials that you hiddenly decide, in a hidden manner you decide how much power you want to spend, and then there are secret ways to influence it inside through the combat cards. But every little element of combat is it's a very, very tight balance. I don't know if Scythe's combat is as good as it could be, but I know the evolution of it, and I know that even changing like the smallest thing, like not getting a combat card if you don't put up a fight, or that the attacker wins ties, little things like this, if you adjust them, it throws a lot of stuff out of balance that you may not realize. So it was an interesting challenge to design combat and see how much it evolved over time. I mentioned Rex for combat. There are a few games that influenced the design of Scythe. Rex was there for combat. Kemet has had a huge influence on Also, the interactions between players, in that in Scythe you don't lose a lot. If you lose combat, you can get right back in there pretty soon, because you're not actually killing units, you're just retreating back to your home base. Kemet also has these tunnels that create essentially adjacency from across the board. So no matter where your faction is, if you're in, say, a 2 or 3 player game, even though it might look like the other faction is all the way across the board, they're actually quite close to you because of those tunnels. I got that from Kemet. And also the engine building element and a lot of kind of the rewarding systems in Scythe. Pretty much everything you do in Scythe rewards you usually about twice, 2 times, sometimes 3, sometimes 1, but usually twice. I got that element from Terra Mystica. Scythe is this, in many ways, is Terra Mystica with a little bit of interaction, and obviously very different art and theme. Terra Mystica was a huge influence on Scythe, and it continues to be one of my favorite games. James also asked about price point and how we price our games. The standard formula that I use, I don't know if it is completely standard, but I've heard other people in the industry mention it, is the cost of the game is 5 times the MSRP is 5 times the cost of manufacturing the game. So if a game costs $12 to make, I give it an MSRP typically of about $60. And one of the reasons for that cost that you may not know about is when distributors buy games from me, they buy them at a 60% discount. And so, say Viticulture is a game that costs about $12 to make. I sell it, it has a $60 MSRP, but I sell it to distributors, not completely by choice, but just because of the way the industry works, I sell it to distributors for $24. So that's obviously a huge gap between 60 and 24, but that gap is much tighter between the $12 it costs to make and that $24. The 12 doesn't include freight costs, so I still have to pay freight to get that game from China to our warehouse and then from our warehouse to the distributor. And it doesn't include sunk costs like art and graphic design. Ideally, we do many print runs of games, so the sunk costs become greatly diminished over time, but up front there are some significant sunk costs to make any game. James was kind of curious about why some of our games that have very beautiful components and a lot of different components have similar MSRPs to games that maybe don't have those same components. I take this as a compliment, James. Thank you for asking about that. And we do put a lot of thought into the detail in our games. And I also put a lot of thought into the wallets of our fans and our potential customers. A game like Scythe probably should cost about $95 based on how much it costs to make. But I didn't want to charge $95 for it. I thought, as a consumer myself, as a gamer myself, I see Scythe. I wanted to make an $80 game with that level of components. It has tons of wooden components and miniatures and tons of art and cards and dual layered player mats that I'll talk about in a second. But yeah, $80 seemed right to me. More recently, I've gone through a similar decision-making process on Charterstone. Charterstone should probably be pretty close to a $90 MSRP, but it's a legacy game, and I know that even though Charterstone you can play after the campaign, so it's a 12-game campaign, and then you can continue to play it after 12 games. I still understand that people are going to look at it as I would as a consumer and see a 12-game campaign. I'm going to get 12 plays out of this, and maybe I'll play it after that. I don't really know, but at least I know if I like it, I'm going to get 12 plays out of it. And $70, originally I wanted $60, but I definitely can't go to $60 based on how much it costs to make. But $70 just seemed like a fair amount to charge related to what you're going to get out of playing Charterstone. Yeah. So those are some of the things I think about. As for why other companies charge more for games that have lesser components, I don't know. I think it just depends on like I don't even know their manufacturing costs. Sometimes you don't really know. It depends on where they're manufacturing, how many copies they're manufacturing, things like that. So in the end, I just want the customer to be happy, and I think most publishers feel the same way about that. They just have different budgets and different multipliers. So now I'm going to talk about my top 5 tips and strategies for kind of leveling up as a Scythe player. I look forward to hearing your thoughts in the comments about this, because I'm sure some of you who have played Scythe a number of times have some advanced strategies that you might be willing to share. These are 5 of mine, in no particular order. Actually, kind of in order. They're kind of in chronological order over the course of the game. A lot of them have to do with the player mats. So this is the player mat for Scythe that's broken into 4 sections. Each has a top action and a bottom action. Whenever you take an action, if there is a cost, you'll see it in red. You always pay the cost, and then after you pay the cost, you gain the benefit. So one of my favorite things to do in Scythe is to combine the trade and produce top row actions. So you have produce here and trade over here on this player mat. The order of the top actions varies per player mat. So my favorite thing to do at the beginning of any game of Scythe is to take the trade action and the produce action in either order in such a way that I can take the bottom row action on my second turn. Because in Scythe, one of the key elements of success in Scythe is being able to take a top row action and a bottom row action on your same turn. You're doubling up by doing that. You're taking 2 actions on the same turn instead of 1. And you're allowed to do that if you can actually pay for the bottom row action. So I tend to look at that on the player mat that I receive, and it has to align with where my workers start out on the board, because you have 2 workers that start out on the board on hexes, on territories adjacent to your home base. And so say the produce action on this one is above deploying a mech. So for this to work, I would need to have a worker on a mountain to start the game, because I need to produce with that worker and produce an ore, and then, well, actually in this case I would do the trade action and I would get 2 ore, get 2 metal, and then on my second turn I would take the produce action, I would get another metal from that worker, and then right away I would deploy a mech. It's not always feasible based on your starting position or your player mat, but I always look for the option to be there. And that option can often guide me in one of the paths that I take in the game. My number 2 tip is that I almost always aim to get exactly 5 workers for the vast majority of the game. Sometimes maybe the first 20% of the game I'll just stick with 3 workers. 2 is hardly ever enough. I rarely go after 8 unless it's to get the star at the end. And the reason for that is up here at the produce action, these spots are all covered up by 6 workers at the beginning of the game. And whenever you take the produce action, as I noted, you have to pay the exposed cost, and then you gain the benefit. And that's regardless of whatever you produce. Like, if you want to take the produce action and you want to gain any production benefit, you have to pay that cost first. And so if you have produced all of your workers, every time you produce from then on, you're going to pay a power, a popularity, and a coin, which is really expensive. But there's kind of a sweet spot on here where you can see the power there. If you only have 3 workers produced here and 2 that you start off with, so 5 workers on the board, your cost to produce using 5 workers, hopefully spread over 2 territories, because you're only producing on 2 territories at default. Your cost is only 1 power, and power, while important in the game, is pretty flexible. You don't always need it. You only kind of need it when you want to be a threat or when you want to actually engage in combat. I'd much rather spend power than popularity or coins, which equate to points in the game. So that's a big thing I do. I like to get 5 workers out there and just stick with 5 workers for most of the game. Tip number 3 is that sometimes I completely ignore my objective cards. Let's see, here are some objective cards. So objectives in the game, you get a couple of these at the beginning of the game. They're all unique. They do different things. And sometimes I just ignore them, because many of the objectives are designed to kind of make you do something that you didn't think about doing when you entered the game. And so what that can mean is that your objective may not be, or neither of your objectives may be very good for your faction, your player mat, other choices that you want to make in the game. They may pull you in the wrong direction. And so when that happens to me, if I've got a strategy I want to pursue that, or that's just working out for me based on my faction and my player map, my position on the board, and the objective goes against that, I ignore it, which is totally fine. It's only 1 star that you get from an objective unless you're playing the Saxon faction. So I would say maybe 50% of the time I kind of just say, okay, this objective just isn't going to happen. I always have it in the back of my head that it's there. I check at it throughout the game. But if it's going to pull me too far in another direction, I ignore it. Tip number 4, something I do guys, hold up 3 fingers, 4. Number 4, something I do in almost every game is when I suspect that we are getting close to the end of the game, I spread out as much as possible. This may seem super intuitive, but a key thing inside, or a tough thing inside, is that you don't always know exactly when the game is going to end. You can keep an eye on other players and what they're doing and how many stars they have, but someone with 4 stars could rip through 2 combats and win 2 combats in their turn, and the game is over. And so once I get kind of close to that point, that's when I start spreading out. Because I don't want to be caught off guard. I want to be ready for that period at the end of the game, and every territory is worth coins at the end of the game, so I want to have as much control as possible. Also, near the end of the game, there's usually more interaction between players and more combat, more units that are out on the board moving around. And if I've spread out, particularly with a lot of workers, I'm going to slow down other players. I'm going to cost them popularity if they move into a territory with a worker. If their mechs have speed, their movement ends if they hit one of my workers or any one of my units. And so instead of allowing other players to freely roam around the land, by me spreading out, I impact how much and how far they can move. So even if I'm wrong about when the game's going to end, spreading out at a key point in the game, when I think there's about maybe 20 minutes left in the game, 10, 20 minutes, can be really, really helpful for impeding other players and establishing my control over that territory for endgame scoring. All right, we're at number 5 here, and this is a rule that some people kind of overlook. Perhaps I stated it incorrectly or not as clearly enough in the rule book, but if you have an action, a bottom row action that you have completed, so essentially, say the upgrade action, if I have upgraded all that I can, if I've moved all 6 upgrade cubes from the top of the player mat to the bottom, I've completed that action. But I can still continue to take the bottom row action because the benefits are always optional. So basically, when I take the upgrade action here, say I already have all my upgrade tokens, I could pay 3 oil, and in doing so, I will gain 3 coins. And if I had the recruit ongoing ability, I would also gain a power. But let's say in this case I didn't have that covered up. I would just gain 3 coins for 3 oil, which is a great ratio because at the end of the game, that equates to the best conversion in the game for resources to coins. It's a great conversion, and it's not always for the 3 coin benefit. Like you may, especially with the upgrade, I may have upgraded, say the building action. Say I've upgraded this so that it only costs me 1 wood to build a structure. Say I built all 4 structures, I can continue, whenever I take the top row action, I can continue to take the bottom row action by paying 1 wood and gaining those 2 coins. And this is a great one to keep on taking after you've completed it because you're also getting a popularity. So I might, inside, if you can take the bottom row action in addition to the top row action, you almost always want to do that, especially if there are coins on that bottom row action. So even after you've completed it, continue to take it, and you still have to pay for it. You have to pay the resources, but to continue to do that for the coins is almost always a better conversion than what you'll get for those resources at the end of the game. So I really, really like to do that. I like to just take that bottom row action as much as possible. And this especially happens near the end of the game after you've completed these bottom row actions. So those are my top 5 strategy tips. I'm sure more will evolve over time where I've forgotten some as I brainstormed ideas for this video. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on your advanced strategies and techniques when you play Scythe. I'd love to hear about them in the comments so I can use them when I play. Thank you very much, James, for having me, and thank you for everyone who listened to this. I look forward to chatting with you in the comments and on our website, SoMeyerGames.com, and on Facebook and Twitter and Board Game Geek and beyond. Thanks.